Welcome everyone for another episode of Get Tech Smart. I am your host, Flo Nicholas. This is a show where we talk everything techie. It's a great way to get exposure and learn about everything that's going on in the tech sector, especially right here in New Hampshire. And today's subject is something quite different. We're talking technology and we're also talking psychology and the kind of interaction and connection between the two. Like, trust me, there is a connection. And to explain that connection, I'm really excited for my guest. Welcome, Dr. Brady. You have a long list of accomplishments. So let me just try to get through how amazing you are. So you're a professor psychology at St. Anselm College. You're an advocate for diversity, for women in technology. You've been a TEDx speaker. You are an author. You are just an overall speaker and overall fabulous. And I'm really excited to have you here. So welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really honored.
No, I am really honored because what we're about to talk to about today is something that I've never had any guests come on here and talk about psychology and technology. But you also have a book that's out right now, Technology Touch Points. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of everything, I want people to know who you are. So can you just tell us how you got into connecting psychology and technology?
Sure. Growing up in New Hampshire, technology is sort of part of our DNA, and that may not be, maybe it's a best kept secret, right?
Yeah.
We make missiles, we make chips, we have sort of been on that game for a long time, and the reason that's relevant is, that means we have a lot of brain power and a lot of legacy companies in our region that have consistently contributed to the biggest innovation. So I grew up in that environment, but I'd say my family was on the lower end of that tech pay scale as far as, my mom was making computer chips, around the time she was having me. My dad was, working in Raytheon and physical plant and keeping the lights on there. But always, not necessarily always appreciating that about my own background here in the state. It wasn't until I was an adult that I sort of made those connections and was like, oh, sort of been part of this game for a long time.
Yeah.
But as an adult and as a professional, the connections between psychology and technology started to be revealed just from some of my community work. I direct a lab at St. Anselm College, the Community Resilience and Social Equity Lab. And it took, the whole of my career to get to that place where I was able to bring some of the work I was doing for companies and organizations in the community. I was able to start bringing that in so my students could learn about working with people in important industries.
Oh, that's great. So what's some of the stuff they're doing in the lab? Because it sounds fascinating, and I might invite myself to come and
you are more than welcome.
Join you.
We have a few sides to what we do. One is the Technical Assistance Bureau, where we support organizations who are on a DEI journey or cultural transformation. And some of the ways students contribute there have a lot to do with making sure we're implementing evidence-based practice with those companies. And then we have master's fellows from different universities in the area who come and work with us and work with our clients. And then on the other side of it, we have a game design lab where we create game and play-based interventions for communities and organizations and professions that are experiencing stress and strain. So we've got a bunch of games in development. We have a game designer in residence, Glenn Given, that we've been hosting for a couple of years now. And it's been really neat to be able to see the students really come alive because college, higher ed, education's been affected by the pandemic. So to have hands-on things and problem-solving things and things that really are helping the workforces we know are really strained right now, it's really neat to see them.
Yeah, I'm really happy we're talking about this because I would never have imagined that is going on at St. Anselm College. And I bet people who are going to be watching are going to be like, that's what? Because I think normally when people think gaming, they're looking at like Southern University, for example.
Sure.
And
Well,
their
we have a
gaming program.
partnership with them. We have a game right now where
Nice.
it's not a partnership, but we have a game that their students are working on in the Inkwell Interactive Studio. And our students help to develop and get the art and kind of get some of the information that we want conveyed through the game.
Listen, that's fantastic, and I'm definitely gonna come because I
Great.
want to see what they're doing and just
Yeah.
get that exposure because I love learning. But do you think that your exposure with your parents, your father working from Raytheon and your mother as well, being in the tech sector, do you think that really motivate you to kind of move into this scene?
I would say it. As I mentioned, that was as an adult that I realized, like, oh, wow, they were kind of there. But really, I think it was the fact that they experienced their professional lives on the margins and that they weren't necessarily. I think as an adult, I became aware of the contrast between the opportunity, the innovation, the meritocracy that it can exist in tech, and to recognize the ways that that wasn't an experience necessarily that my parents had. There weren't pathways in, no matter where you started, that could get you into some of the technology decision-making areas. And so I think it was recognizing that, and then what that translates to as far as opportunity, right? There was a lot of barriers to my ability to stay on an academic path and then to actually, make it into academia and be a licensed clinician and all those things that I've been able to enjoy. So yeah, I would say it was sort of a recognition of like, oh, this is a great set of industries to be a part of, and how come there aren't more ways for people to become a part of it?
Breaking down those barriers, which I 100% fully support because we've chatted before and we kind of have similar paths, and we have a similar mission, which is promoting and celebrating more diversity in the tech sector. But I want to focus on how does this all work, psychology and technology, and what do we need to know?
Oh, well, I don't know that I know what we need to know or that we have time, but for the little bit that I do know, I'll say that just as my experience with my parents and their professional opportunities, and then my experience as a parent who was in a very tiny way influencing technology at some kind of critical moments over the past decade plus. I had my children when Facebook was born. So I became a parent. I talk about this in my book, right around the time that iPhones started to be available, and then Facebook as an app was available. There was an app store. You could, accidentally spend $10,000 on a fish, right? Like it was a time.
Yeah.
And those are the years that I became a parent, and I'm a parent of many, so I got to see a lot of different type of humans interact with technology and certain technologies in very early stages of that technology, right?
Yeah.
We were inadvertent beta testers for a lot of things. So it was that I like to observe, I liked storytelling, I like to make sense of the world around me.
Yeah.
And so in small ways I was doing that. And then I started to more formally do that as I kind of recognized the opportunity of some of the technology as regards to young children's engagement in STEM. We talk about, pipeline and technology, and of course it starts in infancy, right? To some degree. So it just led me not only into the spaces where technology was happening, but also to the psychology literature and sort of trying to understand, there's already media studies, there's already lots of research on behavioral habit formation and identity formation and all the little elements that go into how we think and use our technology. So I just started spending a lot of time in that literature and then also reflecting on what I was seeing and noticing. I have children that are 5 or 6 years apart, but there's 5 of them. So there's a range of ages and personalities and styles in our household. And I could see there were differences in how my older children, whose technology adoption, particularly your personal device delivered technology were a few years separated. And then the preferences they had for playing were different.
Right.
And, how much physical, using toys and manipulating them and having conversations and pretending, how that differed for my older children than my younger children who, pretending for them was a Roblox hobby or, some other kind of online material. And even when that wasn't available to them, the physical play they were doing and the pretending they were doing was often, media related.
The things that they've seen on social media.
Right. They would construct an obby in the house for them to navigate, just like
Yeah.
they have been navigating online. So it was this interesting, children rehearse.
Right.
And that's no matter what kind of TV, media, or toys they have, whatever they're seeing, that's how they learn.
They mimic.
They learn by rehearsing. So it was just fascinating to me in a small scale way, thinking and observing that. And then starting to see research findings in the literature that helped me understand that or helped me challenge, either challenge what I was reading or challenge what was happening at home.
Yeah. So, and I guess in a most simplified term, is there is an association between technology and our behavior. Whether I think it's
and
children.
It's mutual, right?
Right.
We're programming it, it's programming us.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I recently saw was just research that's come out. I don't know whether it's fully 100% confirmed, but I would say that it's been alleged that for teenagers, especially teenage girls, there are some dire consequences that come with being on social media, from body image issues, from self-esteem issues. Is that anything that you've come across during your research?
So one of the things that I explored in writing my book was that, and also I really came to the work of my book from a developmental lens, meaning, we develop across a lifetime from infancy through old age. Each mile marker of our development, it may not necessarily be by year, but by a combination of physical and social and psychological development that happens. And so, to that question of, what about adolescent women and girls, how toxic is exposure to technology for them, and really every developmental point, every age has a need for which they may be more vulnerable to some negative messaging or compulsive behaviors associated with technology. And also there are different actors who exploit us at different developmental points, right? We can talk about elderly individuals who may be more trusting, falling prey to financial exploitation.
Right.
We can think about young men falling prey to extremism and messages of extremism. We can talk about boys being sexually exploited, and sometimes we are less aware of how vulnerable they can be on these
Right.
platforms because we are socially kind of tuned in to young women's vulnerability.
Great point.
So it's really not so much, isn't it bad, for X, Y, Z type of person. It really is about that person and about what it is that they're needing and what they may not have access to at that particular moment, that then with technology and sort of the open door to the world that it provides,
Right.
Where the implications of that, child's need or that individual's need and the technology can collide.
Yeah, you bring up so many great points, because as a parent, that's the one thing that does scare me is I love technology. I want to promote technology, but then at the same time, when I'm seeing what's on social media, they're exposed to so much, right? Before we would just be in our backyards playing with sand, eating sand, right? Now,
I don't know what you were doing in your backyard, but
All right, we're making mud pies, okay? But now they can go into this whole other world and just get lost. Because I've had moments where I'm literally calling my daughter, and she's on the phone, and I'm like, hello. You know, they get lost. So it is concerning as a parent who I want to promote technology, but how do we kind of create those boundaries? How do we teach our children to create those boundaries when it comes to technology?
Yeah, I will be very clear, although the subtitle of the book is Parenting in the Digital Dystopia, I don't have answers in the book, right? So I have a lot of great questions. I can't pretend that we have things figured out. This is not a like, here's how, this is not like, I don't even know what family would like present themselves as the role models. That is not any sort of attempt being made to do that in this work. But I go back to my training and my experience as a clinician and as a scholar, right? The work that I do in my scholarly work, how I get to work with tech companies or build games. It all has to do with trauma and resilience, which is the core of the clinical work that I've always done and the core of my scholarship. And so boundaries are important. I think it's completely appropriate for parents to have no-go zones online and say, you know, nope, we just program our router that those are not available. And, you know, I don't think we do well by our children to prevent them access to something that is part of being a functional adult.
Right.
And we have to learn how to manage our own appetites online and how much time we spend and where we're going and, you know, what we're using it for and what we're using it to avoid. And we have to, you know, manage all of that because really at the core of our relationship to technology, at least the kind of technology that we have a sense of control over, which we can get into that, it's emotion. And it's, you know, do we feel connected? Are we connecting in the way that we want to connect? And that's has more to do with what's happening around us in real time than it does what's happening online. But I will say, you know, your daughter getting lost in a text, that's a real relationship.
Right.
Like, even though that person's not in the room with you and her, for her emotionally, that person is. And so that absorbing attention, it's sort of like, well, if she was hanging out with a friend in 3 dimensions, we'd know, like, well, the joke is happening, so I can't, like, get her attention right now. I'll wait for the laughter to subside. But we don't see that. We don't hear that. We don't feel it when we see them engaged with their phones. Yeah,
so I think that the pandemic has really kind of changed the way we socially connect with each other, right? I think before, I mean, and we're starting to get back to in-person networking and connecting.
No, but you're real. You're not like on a screen right now. It's very exciting.
But where I'm seeing this kind of switch where it's like, hey, you can come in person or hybrid. So I almost feel like just the social aspect of it, the social networking, that we're just seeing something that happened during the pandemic that's not going away. Now it's, you know, grandmother is, or grandpa is in Florida, but that's okay. We're gonna, you know, use the video, you know, we're gonna video chat. And we're still able to keep those connections. So it's almost like you said, that technology, if we do it correctly, it helps with those social connections and keep them going, right? It's no more of, oh, I can't see my grandkids. Now it's like you can see them at any time.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think that's the potential, right? I think when you first started mentioning it, I thought you might land on how that's negative, that we still have hybrid. But you didn't. You landed on the positive side. And you know, I think the potential is for that positivity. And I also recognize that our generations don't experience technology the same way. And that I think it's important to steward the connection. And if that's possible, that's what you should be doing with it. And for some, that feels less satisfying. That amplifies the disconnection that they experience afterwards. And those are things that, you know, I think they're surmountable. I think we can get over that. But I think those are part of that emotion that can complicate our picture and how we think about and use technology.
Yeah. So I worked from home for over 8.5 years, so I would never say anything negative about working
Good.
remotely.
We need more voice like that, because
Yes,
there's some cranky pants
Yeah.
right now. We're like, no, bring it
Yeah.
back, all back.
Exactly, and I think we've seen that, companies that are doing the mandates, we see the pushback from employees who are now we have quiet quitting. I just heard about quick quitting.
Goodness.
Because people
the
are
think
saying,
pieces.
right, there's so many trends I can't keep up.
Right.
But I think, some people do have this, notion that, for us to have human connections, emotional connections, that it has to be made in person. But it seems like what we are seeing, the opposite, is that, for some people, they are able to make those connections and continue those connections even remotely without, I don't have to touch you. I can just see. But although the way technology is going,
I know, right? That's a matter of time.
I feel like within the amount of time you could physically.
And then I think we'll see the real distinction of like, no, actually, I just needed to get some space from y'all.
Right, right, exactly. That's why I'm hybrid. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I, with your book, I think, I saw like a little summary of it where it's, saying, people shouldn't fear technology. It shouldn't be friend or foe, or it should be a friend, not a foe, I should say. We do see almost like a highway, right, where you have people in the breakdown lane that are like, I don't know if I'm gonna move with this technology thing.
Right, yeah.
And then you got the people who are in the, slow lane, kind of like, I'm just gonna watch everybody else.
Right.
And then there are people in the middle lane that are kind of like, ooh, I like this. I'll try it out, but I'm still hesitant. And then you have people like me who are like, buckle up, we're going, How do we piece it all together?
That's a great question, and shows you that I don't have all the answers, because I actually have to think here.
Because, as part of your study, what are you finding? Because you chatted with a lot of experts.
I did, and that's where I was thinking. I was thinking about being in the fast lane and what that means, because I think we have to pay attention to that fast lane, because that's the lane that helps us understand what can go wrong, and that can also alert us to whose interests are served by certain types of technology, because that's who's going to get in the fast lane, right?
Exactly.
And also recognize that it's that fast lane, and it's one's ability to be in that fast lane. And this is part of what I would do in my book interviews. I was always curious kind of what the interviewee's tech story was, how it was that they came in, just as you had asked me. And so my point is, with that fast lane group, there are certain factors that get you access to technology first, whether that be because of the cost point or because of sort of how emerging it is, right? How close are you to that innovation center? And so that has implications for those, what marketers would call laggards, those folks that are maybe in the breakdown lane, right? And so what does that mean for, if someone adopts this from a different social position, who doesn't have as much financial cushion, gets into crypto, but it's not extra, it's, the savings, for an example. So I think those are one piece of the puzzle, one clue that we could tune into and recognize, okay, so there's a lot of responsibility on being first, and there's implications, because then more of it gets made for people like you and not necessarily people who are not yet on the highway. And then when we shift as a society to things that were built in the fast lane for the fast lane, we have to recognize that we're already not bringing everyone along in our society, right?
That's true.
And so when we think of all of the things that start to get shifted because of the technology that's possible in the fast lane, medicine, medical care, right? Education, banking, these fundamental services and things that we need in our communities can suddenly disappear physically from a location. And there's lots of pushes to do that, right? Everyone's government is running on fumes, and we want to constrain budgets, and all of it is perfectly logical, and yet has some real serious implications for our communities.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon something that's really critical, is that, and I didn't even think about that when I was talking about the fast lane, is that the people who are in the fast lane are the ones who are probably able to quickly get this technology because they have the financial means to get the technology, try it out, and see whether it works. Mm-hmm. So one of the things you said is that, we do have, obviously there's always the big top companies that are creating all these, tech savvy tools and able to do the research. Do you think that we do see a lot of tech startups, right? Especially right here in New Hampshire. We're starting to see there's so many fantastic companies creating so much groundbreaking technology. But do you think that it should be something that each town, whether you're rural or got 20,000 people to 1,000 people, that they should have access to funds that will help them transition from the breakdown lane into the fast lane when it comes to technology?
I love the idea of every community in America having a voice on technology. Yeah. And if that came with a budget, I think that's great. I think that balance of voice and budget is really necessary because, obviously mass market anything is going to homogenize a group. It's going to make, this becomes the standard, and that's therefore we can't want for anything above that standard. We have to, be happy with this standard. And not every standard works for every community, for every household, right, for every child. And so as I was working with some of the interview material and thinking about one of our interviewees, his work started actually looking at social work interventions that could help with community violence. And he tuned into Twitter, and he realized that, some of the back and forth trash talking that he was seeing, or the kind of messages that he was seeing from youth in a particular community that he was in, they were about alerting each other of risk, hey, don't go that way to school, go this way. Or they were, kind of taking it from the streets to the tweets to try and, egg each other on, and that would result in real violence. And, he noticed that would happen more often with following other violence, and he tuned into the trauma cycle, which is how I found his work. But in his conversation with me for this book, he really emphasizes real people who are in the breakdown lane, people who are in, just getting onto the highway, and how from every stage of development and implementation, we need to hear from those folks. And right. We need to understand the implications and the features and the uses that any given technology could have for them or their families, and that's really how we get to an inclusive tech environment. Right. And then when those voices mean as much as the CEO voice, the stakeholder voice, the venture capitalist voice, that we're really going to be making an impact on equity in tech.
Right. And one of the things that I can say that I am happy to see is that there are tech startup companies that are coming up to find affordable solutions to big boxed items. So we do see that happening, but as you mentioned, it's something that we need to see happening more often across all industries and across all towns.
Maybe as policy, right? I mean, I think too we have, when you and I were preparing for this conversation, I talked about a little part of my book that has to do with railroads because ironically, I didn't realize this until writing the book, that if you lay the river maps of the country and then you lay the railroad maps of the country, you kind of have the cell network of the country, and there's lots of reasons for that. And so just recognizing that our federal government, there's policy that could support parents having more voice, regular people having more voice in how technology is funded and, scaled up in all of our communities.
No, yeah, that's definitely a great point. And what other gems of goodies in your book should we know about before we run out of time?
Yeah, I really try to take that developmental approach that I mentioned. So the first half of the book is really chapter by chapter examination of what are these developmental touch points that every human encounters, and not necessarily always at the same age, but roughly the same few years. And then what are the implications of that regarding the impact of technology on that developmental need? Right. And what does that mean for us if we're parents and we're trying to plan how our kids navigate the world? What do we need to be aware of as far as the interests and the way that the technology engages our children at those different ages, or ourselves as adults, because I do include adulthood years. And then all of that kind of brought me to a place of, okay, so if so much of technology innovation is about valuation and which companies actually get supported to scale their product and idea, then that means a lot of the technology we have isn't necessarily grounded in the values that a given family may have or a given community may have. And so pausing in the book and really spending some time there led me on some interesting paths that hopefully you'll hang on for if you read it, and if you read it. But really helped open my eyes to sort of the individual power we have, certainly in our households, but then also the collective power that we have in trying, all of us as parents and as community members, to do the best by our world that we can when it comes to these decisions.
Yeah, and do you think when it comes to behavior and technology, do you think there's some addictive element to technology that probably shapes our behavior, and as well as looking at children at a young age, how it shapes their behavior as they grow up?
Yeah, so I think that humans respond to stimulus and they respond to reward, and humans learn. And so technology, and particularly a device that's internet connected and has all sorts of brilliant creative minds contributing to what you get to see in it, it's pretty compelling. And I think we're wired as humans to find it compelling and to find that what we get there rewarding, whether that be access to information or it be, attention or what have you. So that being true, I find as I go through that book, I find that I don't know that it's addiction. I think it's programming, right? It's hard to look at it objectively because we function in a capitalist system, and so it is in the interest of the companies that make those investments to capture our attention and keep it. So I don't know that that's addiction per se, right? It's programming. Yeah. It's literally engineered to do that with us. And so, but that's where we go back to any compulsive behavior, including drug use. What's going on for that individual? In what ways are they feeling disconnected already that then makes this, whatever this is, so compelling? What is that emptiness that this opportunity is providing? And not everything is a deep wound. Sometimes it's really nope, they know that if they put this in front of you two times, that you're going to do these things for the next 5 minutes, right?
Yeah. No, and then there's also that other element of, it's not a secret that, we get tracked, when we're online. When you go to specific browsers, they're watching what you're doing and what you're interested in. And it's if you ever, let's say you're shopping for a pair of black boots, all of a sudden, now you're just getting black boots, photos of black boots just coming up everywhere. You're like,
if I get them after this talk, I'm going to screenshot them and send them to you.
Yeah. So that's what happens, is that we do get drawn in, and social media and technology is like a good Netflix show, where I've literally, if I found a great show, I will binge watch that show.
It's the worst.
And I'm done in 2 weeks. And I'm like, how did I just finish 10 seasons off a show in 2 weeks. But that's how technology is. So it does have that. They draw your attention. They're going to capture your attention. And of course, it makes sense that they would do that because that's how they make the money, right? No one's going to make money if I'm not showing up and repeatedly showing up and purchasing stuff. So
Well, we could choose differently, right? I mean,
We could.
as a society could choose differently and say there are some areas of technology that are just so important socially that they need to be nurtured in their earliest years, right? And to some extent we do that. We have different funds, even here in New Hampshire, that tech companies are able to take advantage of to kind of get themselves going or keep themselves through an innovation cycle.
Yeah.
Sorry.
no, it's fun. So what do you think about the shape of technology in New Hampshire as we close?
Yeah, I think the shape of technology, well, you always want more. I hope the shape of technology, though, will allow itself to spread into the parts of our state that have historically not received its benefits. And I mean that from the North Country, where we've had certain types of industries cycle down and seen a real shrinking of those communities and a shrinking of the resources that they have access to. And also within communities, Manchester's, not rural by any means, but we certainly have parts of our city that there isn't an equal chance that someone living on that street or in that apartment is going to end up in this industry as someone who might be living in a different community or a different city block. So I hope that, we don't tie ourselves so fully to the 93 South Corridor and to the easily accessible on and off ramps around it, but that we are really sensitive to the ways that we can bring the industry meaningfully into contact with adults. We do a lot of work on STEM education in the state, but I think we have to do a lot more with emerging and middle adult workforce development in this state for technology.
Yeah, and there are actually some programs that I just learned about that are available for adults that are looking to get back into work, but let's say if they want to focus on tech, I think there's work in New Hampshire that's available. There's another program, which I can't think of the name right now, but I did invite them to come on the show so they can let people know of the funding that's available. I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen is that there are programs out there that no one knows about. And I'm like finding these programs and I'm like, do you realize nobody knows that you guys are available? And there was like Apprenticeship New Hampshire, who I recently had here to talk about.
They've been doing good work.
Yeah, they're doing good work. And that's those various programs are how we start to making it accessible for everyone, no matter their economic background, to be able to get into tech.
I think it'd be great if every tech company made a commitment that a certain proportion of their workforce would always be in the state. Because I think in the hybrid world, it is incredibly feasible to hire anywhere. And I think, there's a lot of reasons a company might choose to base itself here in New Hampshire. And I think it should always be the case that a reason is our workforce and our local workforce.
Well, I agree with that 100%, and that's why I'm having that DEI New Hampshire Tech Networking event, so I'm excited about that. We'll talk about this offline, but thank you so much for being here, Dr. Brady. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking for my invitation to come on campus.
Okay, well, the book comes out November 11th. It's available now for pre-order, and after I get through the official launch date of that, I'm very happy to have you come visit.
Well, I will be there, and I'm sure probably someone from our team will be here, will want to come too, because he loves gaming stuff. So thank you again for coming here. You're welcome back anytime. And thank you, everyone, for watching another episode of Get Tech Smart. Stay tuned for more.